Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is financial advisor and money coach Jodielynn Craven.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
And we're especially happy because this experiment that I've been working on for the last, 3 months or something like that, trying to marry StreamYard to Zoom. And I actually had succeeded a little bit. We kind of had it for like a week or so there, but didn't quite work. The machine was overloading. Well, I finally got that computer memory installed. And guess what? It works. It works. Oh my God, it works.
Isn't that the best feeling, Walt?
It is. It's a great feeling. You know what's really weird about it, Jody, is I had not actually hoped to do this for any really good reason. It was more like, I just want to be able to do it. I mean, 99% of our listeners are just hearing the audio. They don't even see the video. The small percentage that actually do see the video are a very small percentage. They don't really care about the stuff that I'm looking at, but I cared. It was important to me.
Yeah.
And almost to the point of obsession, which I have to kind of take a look at. But I mean, I was determined to make it work, and I finally got it to work. And plus, we were talking about this just before we got started. We get this really cool side result, because what we're doing is we've got Zoom connecting through my computer through a software called OBS. It's an open source software. And then I'm running that into StreamYard. And when it gets to StreamYard, now in Zoom, I have this starry background. Most people don't know about that, but anybody who has seen the video knows I have this starry background. It's my way of saying I've got the universe having my back, So it's kind of a nice metaphor. Well, it's a knockout background. If anybody knows what a green screen is, it basically knocks out what's really going on behind me, puts a starry background in. It's kind of cool. What was unexpected, now when you hooked in, you don't really have any kind of special background, it's just the background of the room that you're in. But we found that when you're talking, my background ends up as your green screen background on StreamYard.
Yeah.
And that is just freaky.
Yeah. It is.
I don't even know how it happened.
It was a happy accident, right?
It is. It's a happy accident. So we're very happy about it. That's good. But, this is pretty wild. And I see Sam has logged in on the live stream. So, hey there, Sam. Glad to see you. Our guest today actually bailed at the last minute. So we're going to be doing the show without a guest, but that's okay. We know how to do these things. And we are continuing with this new experiment of doing old stuff. Started on Friday with adding a deep dive, meaning diving deep into a particular topic at some point during the show, and then on Monday adding in the idea of bringing in Q&A, which we haven't done in a couple years, but when we were doing it, it was really popular. We got a lot of good response out of it. We actually got to the point where listeners were sending in questions too, which was a lot of fun. In fact, very often we would just spend an entire show on one question from one listener because it was such a great thing to dive into. So we're going to kind of get back into that again. And I've been picking out questions out of various groups on Facebook. And unlike in the past, Jody, what we used to do is we used to look for people who were asking questions about the law of attraction. I decided, no, we need to go out further afield than that. So I'm just like drawing from any group. These are people who have no idea what law of attraction is, or in most cases anyway. They don't understand any of the stuff that we're talking about here. So we really have to frame everything in real world terms, which is a fun challenge. It's a challenge for us, right? And it also gives us the opportunity to kind of explore how do you talk to people about stuff like this without having all the vernacular, without having all the stuff we normally talk about. Because among other things, it's also going to make it easier for our listeners when they're talking to people. Oh, yeah, I remember what Walt and Jodielynn talked about on the show. I can do the same kind of thing. So we're kind of setting a pattern here.
It starts to marry the third dimension with everything else that is going on behind what our eyes can see, or in front of what our eyes can see, the universe and energy and all of these things, because it becomes this concept of like, yes, that's great, and I believe it, that there's so much more going on, but how do I bring it to the tangible, like, I wake up in the morning and I brush my teeth. This is the humanality of it, like being human. So I love that you're taking questions from other groups, because then it gets people into that mindset of looking at the third dimensional world, their humanity, how they're showing up from this larger energetic perspective or universal perspective. So
Absolutely.
Brilliant, Walt.
Oh, well, I can't say it's brilliant, but thank you. I appreciate that. I'll accept that. It's a very nice compliment. But it's not even original. I'm not the one who came up with it first, but nevertheless, I like it.
Well, kudos to them too.
That's right. That's right. Yes. We appreciate all sources. It's a wonderful thing. So, yeah, I've got a few questions picked out here. And at some point, we're going to do a deep dive into something. We don't know what yet. We will find out as we go. It'll be where we want to go in, really, because especially since we don't have a guest to interview, we'll have lots of time to explore things. And something's going to get our attention. And when it does, we'll just dive into it and see where we can go with it.
Perfect.
All right. So the questions that I picked up today, now, and by the way, I've also been participating in a lot of these group discussions that we're finding. I actually have a VA who's going out and finding stuff for me. A different VA, actually, Jody, from the one I was telling you about before. This is somebody else I've hired on the side a little bit. And she's just going out and finding appropriate questions for me to address in groups all over the place. And as I've been answering these questions, I'm really doing it in part to build audience, because you want to have more and more people finding out about what we're doing here. But it's also a great way to kind of sharpen the skill that we're going to be leaning on here on the show today and on future shows. And I'm liking the experience. I'm liking the experience, and I'm liking the feedback I'm getting. People are liking what I'm saying for the most part, which is always a good thing. And I'm liking the dynamic of it. So I'm really hoping that it's kind of like a precursor for more and more people being interested in the show, but also us being more and more interested in what's going on in the wider world. I'm hoping that it works both ways. So that's my goal. All right. So the very first question comes from, I don't remember which group this is. I should probably make a note of which groups they are, but it doesn't really matter. The questions we have for today are all relationship based anyway, so we'll just leave it at that. Ooh. Now this one says, I really need advice and help. My ex and I have been together for 4 years. We broke up during COVID when his mom passed away. He was the love of my life, and he even admits he hasn't found a love like the one we had. Over these last few months, he's been on and off trying to see me and cuddle with me and hang out like old times. But I just found out yesterday he's having a daughter with some girl he's known for a year, and it's happening in 3 weeks. He's talking about her moving in with him and trying to be a family. Now, I know it's wrong, she says, but I'm so hurt because of the last 6 years, I had imagined our family together. And then this is where it gets really, really sticky. She says, while we were in college, he and I had 2 abortions together. So this hurts even more because I did that for our future together. Interesting rationale. Now we'll never have a future together. We agreed we loved each other and that we would take the time to date other people, but in a few years, we'd come back and settle down. Now he's made a, quote, mistake, unquote. I'm not sure what to feel. I feel hate. I feel envy toward the girl and the baby and him. And I know it's all disgusting. I'm disgusting with myself, but my feelings are everywhere. And she wonders, what can I do? How do I start to heal? How do I forget him? So it's one of those real world questions that people deal with frequently, and we never really see them happen. It certainly doesn't. It's not the kind of thing that shows up on the news or something like that, But people deal with it. They're sticky. They're messy situations. All kinds of crazy stuff going on. So it's a kind of a rough. Talk about deep dive. We're diving off the deep end with this one.
Ooh, we're getting right in today.
We are. Yeah, we don't do half steps.
I love it.
Do you want to take first crack at this?
Well, the first thing that I would say, if this individual had come to me and asked this question, I would tackle the emotional side first. Because it feels that behind her words and a little bit within her words, she's beating herself up for feeling all of these things, feeling jealous or envious or feeling angry and upset, even though this was a part of the plan and they discussed it, like not the baby part, but them moving apart. And she's feeling all of these things, like the past of the abortions that they had and all of this. And it feels like, to me, when I listen to what the words that she wrote, that she's beating herself up for feeling anything at all. And that's where I would start, is it's okay to feel your feelings. It's actually important, because a lot of times in our society, we try and suppress and then just be happy, just shift to being positive. But what happens is we just push all of those feelings down, and then we carry them around like extra baggage with us everywhere. And, it distorts everything else. So allow yourself, or give yourself permission to feel it. and identify, what is it? Do I feel envy? Why do I feel envy? And I think a lot of these things are really normal. Whether I've had, exes that, I've done the breaking up. I didn't want to be with this person. I was the one that left. Right. And then when that, that individual got engaged, I was like in my bed underneath the covers crying. I'm like, what's wrong with me? Because the thing that I couldn't, I guess, reconcile in my own brain is I didn't want to be with him, but I also was jealous or envious that he was at the point of getting married. And that's what I wanted from that relationship, not necessarily with him, but I mean, when I was with him, I wanted it with him, obviously. Sure. But after it was over, it was like a gut punch, because he was moving on with his life. And even though I didn't want to be with him, I wasn't at that spot with anyone. So it kind of made me feel like envious in a way, or jealous that he had gotten there first and that I hadn't found my person yet, and I was devastated about it. So the first thing I would say is you need to really allow yourself to feel whatever it is. Give yourself permission. And if you're afraid of attracting, we're going to loop it back to the law of attracting bad things towards you because you're in a crappy mood, just imagine yourself in a bubble and then allow yourself to feel it for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you have space for, or you want to give yourself space for in this moment, so that you can just get it all out. And then you can start to reconcile what those feelings are. And if you actually feel them, like, are you feeling this loss because this person did this with someone else? Did you really want to be with them? Is that what you're saying? And now you feel, this greater depth of loss because he's moving on with someone else? Or was it, oh, well, that was supposed to be the plan. And, I just had, that's where my road map was supposed to go. And now I don't know where it's going to go. And there's that loss on that side too. Like, where do I go next? But feeling the feelings first is what I would say.
I love that. I think it's so important. I'm glad that you brought out the importance of feeling the feelings. And I'd even add to it, feeling the feelings all the way through. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is we have a tendency, like you say, as humans, to repress. And when we repress, what we're really doing is we're not allowing ourselves to feel the whole thing. It's like, I can feel this thing that I really don't like, so I'm going to cut it off because I don't want this terrible feeling to hang over me. And then it hangs over us because we haven't felt it all the way through. So it's kind of one of those ironic, gut punch, I think was the phrase you used. And it's a really good way to describe it, that gut punch. And you keep getting punched. It isn't a one-time punch that way. No. You're getting punched over and over and over and over and over again because you don't feel the whole thing through. Not to mention all the other issues that are going on, but just the emotional side of it. Yeah. You're just not letting yourself get through it.
Yeah, I feel like we're not equipped as a society, as human beings. Like, I know I was never taught how to feel my feelings. That's, how to feel them all the way through. So it's really uncomfortable to sit inside of the feelings. What I have witnessed with myself and with the students that I teach, because this is a huge part of your energy and attracting money, is feeling your feelings and letting that stuff go. But when I finally allowed myself to do it and sit in those feelings, as uncomfortable as it was, as intense as it got, it moved very quickly through me because I was allowing it to move through instead of trying to fight it. Like, I don't want to feel this. This feels gross. Yeah. So that's a great point.
Yeah, that's really true. It's a good description, too. I like the way you describe that. It's funny, too, how we run away from these things. I understand why we do. I think we all understand why we run away from them. But it's the one thing that actually makes it worse. That took me a long time to learn that running away from it actually makes it worse because it doesn't seem like it's going to work that way. And the only reason I found that out is I remember the first time I just something had come up. It wasn't really, really huge, but it was big enough that I was feeling pretty overwhelmed. And I just sat with it and I said, okay, I'm going to go with this process of feeling it all the way through. And when I felt it all the way through, I was amazed how fast it dissipated.
Yes.
I mean, really fast. We're not talking days. We're talking 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Even really, really big, heavy, stuff. It doesn't take long when you allow yourself to feel it and all the way through and let it move through you completely. Yeah. It doesn't take long. Yeah.
So I hope more and more people start paying attention to that and believing it and teaching it to others and so forth, because, wow, I wish I had known that one, 30, 40 years ago. My life could have been so much less painful if I had understood that. Nobody told me, like you said, there were no lessons, there were no classes, nothing. Nobody came along and said, well, this is what you should do when you have feelings because this is how you actually get through them faster and it's so much better. No. The message that usually came through was, well, you have to sit with your feelings. Well, that was about the last thing I really wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Especially after decades of not doing it. You're like,
yeah.
oh, no. Once I open Pandora's box, I'll never get
That's
it.
right.
Like, oh, God. And I remember I had an ectopic pregnancy in 2019 that was very devastating and almost killed me.
Wow.
Like I was on the edge. Like if I would have went home with what the doctor was prescribing in that moment, I would have died. I just would have bled out. Yeah. So it was pretty scary. All of a sudden, God spoke up or something to this doctor, and she came back and she sent me to a different hospital that could do an ultrasound and all of this stuff. But after that, there was so much packed into that, like being that close to death. Was very traumatic. Losing a baby, very traumatic. My husband and I, from a guy's perspective versus a girl's perspective, especially in the early stages of pregnancy, it's very different. I'm not a man, so I can't speak on it. But for me, I was already feeling my body change and like the excitement of planning the rest of my life with this new little human. So the loss was great for me in comparison to him. Not that my husband wasn't sad or anything.
Sure.
He just couldn't connect the same way that I could because nothing changed for him except for, 2 pink lines on a stick and then, taking me to the hospital and stuff like that. Right. So it was
also dealing with what you were dealing with. I mean, he was dealing with you at that time too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I remember saying to my friend, she had called me and it was probably a couple weeks after the surgery that I had and everything else. She's like, how are you doing? And I'm like, good. Just automatic response. Good. And she's like, no. How are you doing? And how are you feeling? Like, tell me no BS here. And I was like, to be honest, I don't want to feel it. And she asked me why. And I said, because I'm afraid that if I open this door and look at all of this stuff, the tragedy, the loss, the being so close to death, all of this stuff, then I'm never going to get out of the black hole. Like I can see that it's a cliff and I'm never going to recover it. And she said, yes, you will. You'll be fine. You've got so many people around you that care about you and love you and are watching you and like you're a huge advocate for feeling your feelings. Like, I think she said, God never gives you something that you can't handle or whatever. And that gave me the courage to feel it. And just like you said, when I actually sat with it, I was able to move through it very, very quickly. But it was that fear that was stopping me of once I open that door, I am never getting out of there. Like it's going to be blackness for the rest of my life. But it's not true. It's just, like they say, false evidence appearing real, fear. That's exactly what it was. False evidence appearing real. It wasn't real, and I could move through it.
That's a great story. Wow, thanks for sharing that. That's really something.
Yeah. I've got lots of stories, Walt.
But that's poignant, though, but particularly to what this young woman went through. I mean, it's very poignant. You share. I mean, this is not something we normally talk about in society.
No.
This is
Nobody talks about it.
It's not taboo, but it's close.
Yeah. Well, and I would say in some circles, abortion still is.
Oh, well, definitely abortion is, no doubt.
Yeah. And I mean, I can imagine the guilt of those decisions that this individual had made back then, but then also now feeling kind of ripped off. Because I'm sure, you had mentioned it, it's a weird justification for the reasoning why she did what she did, those 2 abortions. I don't know that you said weird, but different.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But if that was her justification, like, we're not in a place to have a baby or a family and, I want to be with this person, I could see somebody rationalizing it in their mind that way and then going through that, but also still feeling all of the guilt and the shame of making that decision. And then now fast forward where, they're supposed to be building this life together at some point. And she made these decisions because of the situation and now feeling ripped off because of it. Like what would have been if I would have just said yes to one of those pregnancies or, how would my life be different? So I think there's a lot of emotion inside of this one and a lot of societal pressure of what you should be doing or shouldn't be doing or
very true.
All of that. So
yeah. Very true.
Yeah.
The thing that I thought of, the reason I described it as weird at that point, a weird rationale, was because they'd been talking in what she described to us. They'd been talking about having a family, but they'd also been apart lately. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what is the timeline here? So in college, I can understand in college you don't really want to have a family just yet. But by the same token, I mean, it's not like she didn't know how birth control worked. So, what was the communication going on between them? That's what I'm wondering. Like, what role did he play in the fact that she got pregnant? Now, that almost never gets talked about. But to me, that's a big part of it, especially since he apparently got somebody else pregnant. Like, well, there's a pattern going on here. What's going on here?
Ah,
It's a very big pattern here. And that's why I described it as kind of weird rationale. Because on the one hand, having the abortion says, well, they didn't really want to have the kid. On the other hand, she did want to have the kids, but on the third hand, how many hands do we have here? On the third hand, on the third hand, he was directly involved in making that kid happen, and he kind of disappears from that whole conversation too. Like, wait a minute, whoa. I guess the theme that kept running through my head was there's a lack of communication going on all over the place here. There's a lot of stuff that's not being discussed, and I'm not saying that they should bring it out in the public. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm saying between the two of them, there's a lot of stuff that was not being talked about.
yeah, 100%. I think a lot of relationships are like that. You know, if we really spoke what was on our heart and what we're afraid of or concerned of, like from a heart space with that authenticity and vulnerability with our partner, it makes a huge difference in the relationship.
Absolutely.
I'm not perfect by any means in my marriage, but I strive to be open with that communication and
Yes.
fess up to, all the things that I'm feeling, even if it's my fear. Speaking of kids, I'll just be really vulnerable and honest. The other day I was having a conversation, and I noticed a fear that was coming up around kids. We've been trying for a few years, and then we've had some troubles along the way. And I realized in my mind that I had this fear that my husband would decide at this age, whatever age, I never quantified what the age was, but when he gets to this age, because he's older than I am, when he gets to this age, he'll be too close to 50, and then he won't want to have a child because, it's a different set point. So I realized that this fear lived within me, and that was really difficult for me to bring up to him. Like, hey, babe, I have this fear. It's completely irrational, potentially, that, you're just going to decide at 45, which would be 3 years from now, that you don't want to have kids because you're too close to 50. And then, we've lost our shot, kind of thing. And he's like, what are you talking about? I've never had that thought in my mind. He's like, men can have kids when they're like in their 70s, right? And I'm like, I know, I get it. But that was my fear, is that at some point in time, at this certain age, he would decide it's too close to 50, too close to retirement, too close to whatever. stuff that, now you're looking back and it's small potatoes, you were able to communicate effectively about those things too. So you've just built the muscle of communication.
Oh, yeah. And once you build that muscle, I love the way you analogize that. Building the muscle is kind of what it is. Another way to look at it is it's building a habit. I think of it as habitual communication. I mean, we've been together 22, 23 years now, and it's gotten to the point now where communication is just second nature. It's like, if we didn't communicate, that would feel abnormal.
Yeah, 100%, which is so cool. And
it is.
I think that's, why a lot of marriages don't succeed, is because that's lacking that communication and bringing them into the world that is inside of your head and the fears and all of that stuff. People try and deal with that on their own. And, you're in a partnership for a reason.
That's right.
To deal with these things. Yeah.
And it's so much better when you do bring the partner in, because like you say, it's now a partnership that's working together. Now you're not alone anymore. Mm-hmm. Now you're not trying to fathom all the stuff yourself. I mean, there are still things you end up trying to navigate because that's part of what it is in life to be alive. But there's now a lot fewer of them that are going to be tripping you up along the way because you're in it together. Mm-hmm. You're a team.
Absolutely. Yeah, a team. Yeah. Exactly.
It's the best way to be. So, yeah.
I agree.
Well, that's a heck of a way to have to do a deep dive to lose connection entirely, but... There's something metaphorical about that. We're talking about connection. We lost connection. Wait a minute. Hold on.
We can pick back up wherever.
Maybe that's the moral of the story. We lost the connection, but we were able to pick it up again. Why? Because we just kept the conversation going.
Yeah. And there was the desire on both sides to keep having the conversation and keep communicating. Oh,
by the way, that was another point I wanted to pick up on in what the original post was all about. Because the questions that she asked were, what can I do? How do I start to heal? How do I forget him? And when I went to those questions, when I actually responded to her post, I started there. I started with those questions. I said, well, what can you do? There's a lot of things you can do. Went right to the second question. How do I start to heal? Well, how you start to heal, I don't know what your answer is going to be on this. I know what my answer was. My answer is essentially you start to heal by going inside. Mm-hmm. And coming face to face with what it is you really want, because when we get under these endless loops where it doesn't seem like solutions and we're caught up in this emotional morass and so forth, it's because we've forgotten what it is we want.
Yes,
we've just forgotten.
Yeah, I completely agree. Something that really popped out to me, and maybe I'm not understanding the timeline from her message, but she was saying that he got this girl pregnant and that he wanted to move her in and try and be a family. And that was going to happen over the next few weeks, like meaning that she's going to be due, like she's going to have a baby in the next
in 3 weeks. Yeah, in 3 weeks, right.
So the first thing that I thought from an outsider's perspective is, do you want to be with a man who he's saying one thing to you, like cuddling you and kissing you and, getting the relationship kind of like back on, while he's got someone else pregnant, but you have no idea. Like he obviously did not share that until just recently, but it takes 9 months for a baby to cook. So
this is true.
There's a long time in there that he could have told her this was going on. And then on the flip side of that, I think about this other woman in the relationship, and I don't know what their conversations, the man and this other woman, what their conversations are like, but obviously they're talking about building a family. Do you want to be with somebody who you're observing in this moment having a completely different relationship over here and saying something completely different to you? Like that puts up red flags for me about this individual's integrity in this moment and the way that they treat relationships and value partnership, value the relationship, value communication, even just what is the word, monogamy and like the sanctity of
monogamy. Wait a minute, where is that coming from?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
like he's doing all of these things to her as
right.
well. So I come back right to where you stopped. What do you want? Do you really want that. Like, I know that was the plan and I know that was what you're hoping for, but in a world of limitless possibilities where anything is possible, do you want, is that, if you could have it all your way, is that what you would choose? Is someone like that? And maybe the answer is no. And if it's no, maybe this was the greatest shift or diversion or, like switch of events to move you onto the path that you're supposed to be on, instead of going back to this old path that is no longer suited for you or no longer beneficial for you.
I could see a conversation with her, say, 20 years from now, where she calls it a wake-up call.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What a wake-up call.
Yeah, it's a rough one, no doubt. It's a rough way to get a wake-up call. But she got it.
Honestly,
yeah.
I would rather be on her side than on the other woman's side.
That's even rougher.
Yeah. In my opinion, I would be devastated if I was pregnant with someone's child and they were planning on moving in together and starting a family and all of these things. There's all these promises, and then to find out he's still hanging out with his ex. That's not okay with me.
Yeah. There's the other piece of it for me with her, with the one who asked this question, was not just what does she want in terms of what she doesn't want. Are you sure you really want to have the relationship with this person? But also, what do you want in terms of what an ideal relationship would be like?
Great question.
Because it sounds to me like you're settling on stuff that really is not on your list. Mm-hmm. And we do that a lot.
Yes.
One of the best exercises I've ever heard of, and my wife did this one before she met me. A lot of people I know who have been together had this happen. Especially the woman. I don't know why it always works better with a woman, but it's the woman who tends to do it and gets the results. But when the woman sits down and writes out on paper a list of all the characteristics of what she wants in a man or in a partner, depending on which kind of relationship, in a primary partner, what are the characteristics? What is that person like? What are the things that she values the most, that she's looking for? When they do that, when they put it down on paper, I have yet to hear a story where they didn't get a partner that had everything on the paper. All of it, without exception. Mm-hmm. Which to me just it shows totally the importance of being specific about what you want and not settling. Mm-hmm. You don't need to settle.
No. And I think a lot of women do settle, and I've definitely been in that boat before, because of this ticking clock.
Oh, yeah.
Literally, when I turned 28, I would have swear to you, Walt, that I could hear a clock on the wall.
Really? Wow.
Oh, yeah. It was, I don't know why 28, but it was bad. At 28, I felt like I really needed to get married and have a baby and like do all these things. I really didn't care with who. Like, I just needed to get to that stage. I really felt like time was running out. And I'm so grateful that I didn't settle, because I had the opportunity to settle. I was even engaged before I met my husband, and that didn't work out. And, he checked a lot of boxes for me. But when I took a step back, I wasn't seeing the reality of the relationship. I was kind of like rose-colored glasses, for the whole thing. And there was a lot of things that didn't align with what I wanted for my partnership, for that future. And I'm so grateful that I didn't settle, that I just waited, and I had this just certainty that the person I'm supposed to be with will find me. And literally, my husband, we have an office, my brokerage has an office, and we do, like, every week we used to do open houses and friends and family night, and we do like this big presentation on money and how they could work with us in the brokerage business. And he literally was invited by somebody else, and he walked through my door. And that's
wow. Wow, that's great. I love that. Yep.
And it was like love at first sight.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was the universe delivering what you'd asked for. That's the part that I love about it. Because you got specific, right?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And I really focused on what I wanted, like what I wanted my life to feel like, and bringing that into this moment. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to have a joyous life. I wanted to have some adventure. And so I started doing those things with me, like actually enjoying me and my life. And that's when he walked in.
That's exciting. I love that. Yeah, actually, it's interesting you're describing that, because I'm thinking about what happened with my wife. I said she'd also made a list. She had made the list years before we met. She made the list when she was training to be a psychotherapist. It was part of her training, was to make that list. And then she hid it away and hadn't looked at it in all those years. And she also hadn't been really true to it. She hadn't really believed in it. But she'd gotten to the point where literally 6 months before she met me, her cat died. Her cat of 17 years died. And a friend asked her, are you going to get another cat? And without hesitating, without blinking an eye, without thinking about it all, she says, no, I'm going to get a husband. In other words, her mindset had shifted so much that she was determined it was time to find somebody. Yep. And 6 months later, she found me, which was also a miracle in itself because I was going through my own issues. But nevertheless, we did end up making the connection. And when we finally connected and we got talking about it, I remember having a conversation. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but it was along these lines, like, what were you looking for? And I could see the thought process, like, there was like the instant recognition, and you could tell she was remembering something, and the eyes got open, and she says, hang on just a moment. And then she went off into the other room. And now, look, we're still courting here, right? We're not really very deep into the relationship. I'm thinking, where on earth is she gone? But she had gone to look for that paper from like 10 years before. And she found it in seconds. She pulls it up, and she brings it to me, and literally everything that was on that list was me. That was spooky.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That was really spooky. I mean, she'd written that list 10 years before.
Yeah. Wow. It was, divinely meant to be.
Yeah. Well, we said we'd like to do a deep dive. We didn't really anticipate the internet failure in the middle, but we'd like doing a deep dive. We've done our deep dive for the day. I only had 3 of these to do. We spent like half the show on one. This is like, wow.
It was such a juicy question.
It is. It's a really good one. And the other two are actually, I picked because they are mirror images of each other. One is asked by a guy. One is asked by a woman. Both posted in the same group on 2 separate days, 1 day apart. And when you hear them, you'll know exactly why I pulled them out. Okay? So, First one's by the guy. He says, what's up, guys and gals? I got a question. Don't judge me on this one, LOL. So, I want to know, how can you tell if a girl likes you? Female likes male, in parentheses. Is there a body language to look for? Is there something they say, the actions they do, anything would help? And then the one that she posted was, anyway, there's this guy in my hometown. I thought everything was okay with us. He started to come in a lot to talk to me. Then recently he started to come in a lot less. I thought he liked me that way too. And now he's avoiding me. And I said, if you wait, I have a couple of minutes to talk. He walked out in his car and left instead of what he usually does and waits until I come out. He's the guy I just talked to, but thought he had liked me that way until what he did yesterday. So does that mean he's avoiding me? And I'm thinking, wow, these people are asking about the exact same thing. They're asking about body language.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
100%. Super interesting. And it's so interesting how we get all in our head instead of just asking.
Yeah, how about that?
Why don't you just ask? Like, did I do something to offend you or upset you or, or the really courageous question of, I am interested in you. Do you feel the same? Like, I like you. Check yes if you like me too. Like, it really goes back to grade school. Like,
it does. Yeah.
Just ask. Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that both of them were so focused on the body language, like you say, that they forgot to ask. And kind of the way I was thinking about it is they were relying on the body language instead of the communication. And the really tricky part, I mean, yeah, there are body language. We could both list a whole bunch of things that are body language signs that men and women give off. But the bottom line is the body language of the other person that you're meeting, who you're going to end up spending a large chunk of your life with, is not something that you're likely to get right off the bat. You learn it over time. It's not something that, somebody can hand you a manual and says, well, okay, he's doing this, that, and the other thing. Oh, that means he's interested. That's not the way it works.
No, and your perception is based on, your past. So in the past, if, somebody flirted with you or was nice to you or something like that, it meant that they were interested. And maybe for this person, they're just a bubbly, flirty personality.
Could be.
I would be nice to people a lot and in my brokerage business, and I would often get asked out, and I'm like, oh no, like, what am I doing to like send off this vibe that I'm attracted? Because I'm not. I'm just trying to be nice. Yeah. So I think you just cut right to the chase and ask.
I was actually reading up on this lately. There was somebody who went into a school system here in Connecticut, I think in the Westport area. And they wrote up an article. I think the article was actually written a couple of years ago, but it was written from a psychology perspective, and they'd gone in and interviewed all the kids in this middle school. And the first thing they had asked for was, can you tell me who the most popular kids are in school, and can you rank their popularity? And interestingly enough, virtually the entire class all agreed that who the top 5 were. And they almost all listed them in the same order.
Wow.
Which was really interesting. So the researchers dug into it a little bit more, interviewed all the people who were involved in all this, and began to notice pretty quickly what the patterns were. And the patterns were pretty straightforward. The one who was the most popular, and the others were pretty close in terms of the way they were rated by the other students, but the one who was the most popular was kind. She was fun. She was smiley. She smiled a lot. She laughed a lot. She didn't criticize people. She wasn't judging people all the time. And she'd go out of her way to defend people who were more vulnerable. In other words, she was the kind of person anybody would want to hang out with.
Yeah.
And there was also another interesting story. There was the girl who used to be the most popular one. She was now like in the top 10, but she was near the bottom of the top 10. And what had changed is that at some point there'd been some sort of a dust up about something. And in a fit of pique, she had posted this really nasty screed in response to it. And when she did that, her popularity fell off. Isn't that interesting? So the kindness factor played a really big role. When she demonstrates the kindness, or when any of them were demonstrating the kindness, male or female, it applied both ways. Kindness went a long way. Nastiness or judgmentalism, that would bring you back down. It would knock you further and further down the list. So there's a very clear message in there. I mean, you describe yourself as being nice. I think you're actually more kind than nice. In fact, I think there's a big difference between nice and kind. I think nice is a little bit fake. Kind is genuine.
Thank you. Well, then I'm kind.
Yeah. Well, I think you are. I really do. I wouldn't have asked you to be a co-host if I didn't think you were, to be perfectly honest. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, coming back to that communication, something that I strive for in my life is to hear people when they're talking to me and to make them feel not necessarily special, because that feels like inauthentic, because it's not difficult to make someone feel special every single time, but just to pay attention to them as if no one else exists, because I feel like we don't get that a lot in our conversations, because there's like the phone, and there's a beeping over here and this over there. We're so distracted all the time that I've paid a lot of attention, or tried to pay attention to the human that I'm interacting with, and nothing else, to give them that their due in that moment. And I think that's like the epitome of kindness, or goes towards that kindness.
It's also the epitome of good communication, because by doing that, you're demonstrating you are a communicator. And I say that as somebody that you actually want to listen, and that you also want to tell too. You're willing to share, not just be a listener, and you're willing to listen as well, not just be a talker. You want to be both. That makes a huge difference. I mean, I think back to when I was in high school, especially. I was like a wallflower. You may not believe that, but I really was. I was like one of the shy ones, and I was tall, I was shy, so I kind of hid in the background, right? Any photo, of course, I was tall, so I'd be in the background anyway. But I hid in the background, like you. I don't want you to see me. And I was not happy with myself. I was not happy with anybody that I knew. I was not happy being at school, and it showed. And so guess what? I wasn't one of the more popular boys in school. What a shock. I didn't feel good about myself. I didn't feel good about communicating. I didn't feel good about receiving communication. Of course there's not going to be any popularity going on there.
Yeah.
How can there be?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we're calling into our universe whatever we are in this moment. So if you're not feeling good about it, you don't want to, if you want to hide, you don't want a spotlight on you, which is kind of what popularity is. Everybody looking at you, looking at you for direction and how you react. And, you're a leader inside of that tiny little school or whatever, your classroom. And you did not want that.
And speaking of being the leader, there was a little sub-story that came through about the one, her name was Tori, I think, who was the most popular girl in the class. And she not intentionally, but she cemented her status as the top person in the class. When one day a boy named Jason, I think it was, who was not one of the more popular ones, for whatever reason, was getting pelted with a ball by some bully type people. Just kids who were just being mean to him and teasing him and so forth. They were throwing this ball at him and so forth. And in the midst of all that, she saw what was happening. She just walked over to him. She didn't say anything to anybody. She didn't say anything to the boys throwing the ball. She said nothing. She just walked over to him, took him by the hand, and walked him to the guidance office. And that action, in the eyes of virtually the entire school, cemented her as the most popular girl in the school.
Wow. What a woman.
Yeah, right. And she's in middle school, for goodness sake.
Yeah. Wow. That shows so much about her, like kindness, but also courage. Like, I don't care what anyone else thinks. I'm going to stand up for what I believe is right and just and good. Like, that's, especially for a middle schooler, like, wow.
And the caring, too. She cared for this boy who was being abused. And like, no, I don't want him to be abused anymore. I care about him. I'm going to demonstrate that I care for him, and I'm going to help him get out of harm's way and get this handled. And so she just did it. No thought, just go out and just do it. Wow, that was great.
Yeah. Wow. We can learn so much from children, too.
Yes, I've said that for years. I don't think I've told you about this. Most of my listeners know about this. I actually helped to found an alternative school. My wife and I both did.
Really?
It got founded 1 year to the day after 9/11. And it's a very alternative model. It's not at all typical education. And the main way to explain the differentiation is that the kids are completely in charge of their day. Not just in charge of their day, they're in charge of running the school. What? The inmates are in charge, yeah.
That's fascinating. And is the school still going?
It's not, although there's a good reason for that. The good reason is the people who played a main role, including myself, I was actually one of the main leaders, moved away from the school. And the people who remained behind had some good people among them, but they ended up getting tripped up on their own egos in some ways. Wow. And it sort of fell apart. One of the key things about this school, and by the way, we didn't invent this model. This was invented by a group of people in Framingham, Massachusetts, back in the 1960s, when there was all this educational experimentation going on. Well, this was one of the experiments. And it's a fabulous model. But the one way you can trip up the model is the adults can mess it up. Yeah. Not the kids, the adults. The adults mess it up because the adults have this long built-in tendency to say, I'm the adult, I know how to fix this. And they're almost always wrong.
Yeah, I know what's better for you.
I know what's best, yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Whereas,
that would have been cool to watch that, though. Like, watching the children and how, like, I don't know. I just imagine that they'd be running everything from, I don't know that you let them run the finances, but.
We let them run the finances.
They did.
They ran everything. Now, they looked to us for guidance because they didn't know how to do it, Right. But we literally gave them the power. And once they had the power, when you get the power and the authority, all of a sudden the responsibility comes with it. You can't separate it. Mm-hmm. And once you're feeling the responsibility, I mean, talk about how quickly it grows them up. Now, I was able to stay for like the first half year of the school. And I loved the experience of watching what these kids were doing because almost all of them had already been in the regular public school system.
Yeah.
And so they had stuff they had to unlearn because they were used to that old way of doing things. Now they had to take on personal responsibility and they had to take on school responsibility. Yeah. And one of the most fascinating parts was learning how, I'll never forget this one incident that happened. It was very early on. We were using a church facility and basically using the church school area. That was the area we were using. And 3 of the kids had been horse playing in the nursery and actually broken one of the nursery beds. And so the question was, well, what's going to happen now? Okay, how do we deal with this? And because I firmly believed in the model and I was kind of like the adult on the scene, so to speak, during those first few months, I really stuck to the model. And I said, okay, you guys, you're going to have to solve this one. Now, they have this little thing called a judiciary system. And so we had set up our own little mini judiciary. And it's a very small school. There's like 9 kids in the school. This is not a big school. So it was very, what's the word I'm looking for? It was a very rough model at that point because we were still feeling it out. The kids were still feeling it out. So we had our first judiciary meeting to deal with this issue. And I said, okay, so what's going to happen? And I just sat back, and they're looking at me like, well, aren't you going to run the meeting?
Nope.
No, I'm not going to run the meeting. You got to run the meeting. And they spent the next 20 minutes trying to figure out a way to convince me to run the meeting.
That's awesome. So then what did they do?
Well, after they kept trying, and I kept making it clear, no, sorry, I'm not going to solve this one for you. They said, well, we'll just forget about the whole thing. I said, okay, that's fine, but the church will probably kick us out. And they didn't want that because it was the kids who made sure we opened the school. They liked the idea of the school. They wanted to have the school. So they realized this school that they knew was really rare could actually be taken away from them because of this incident. What the hell are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
And so they actually had to work out between the three of them, because the three of them had also been, who were on this judiciary, had also been involved in the incident. They had to figure out what to do. And they actually worked out a solution. It was actually a good solution. They basically worked out a way to raise some money to pay to fix the bed. But they did it.
Wow.
And it was wonderful to watch their mental process as they did it. It was just wonderful to watch. First of all, it reinforces all the old notions that kids can't do this stuff is nonsense.
Yeah.
It's total nonsense. They're perfectly capable of figuring out this kind of stuff, especially if you stay out of their way, and stop making trouble by going in and trying to fix it for them. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the growth that happens in front of your eyes is astonishing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And not just in that incident. I mean, I would see it on a daily basis. Literally, I mean, there were no classes. The kids, they looked at whatever they wanted to look at. They studied whatever they want to study. They got interested in whatever they wanted to get interested in. And even when they were just getting interested in stuff that would seem to an outsider as being, well, that's kind of stupid. Why is he doing that? You could see the learning happening if you watched. You could almost see the mind working like, okay, I've tried this. I don't like this result. I'm going to go try to do that. I'm going to experiment. Oh, I like this thing over here. You could just see them exploring their way through their world.
Yeah. That's so fascinating.
It is.
Yeah. I'd love to do that with my kids when I have them.
I'll tell you this much, too. The school in question is called the Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts. And Sudbury Valley has put out a lot of literature, not surprisingly, over the, 40 years, 50 years that they've been in existence. One of the things they did is they put out a data book. They collected data on past and present students. And it was just raw data in tables and so forth. And I went through that book and I started, basically, how do you process that data and turn it into information? And one of the things I discovered is that kids who go through or who went through that school were 3 times more likely to be entrepreneurs than kids who went through a public school.
Makes sense. Because weren't schools originally developed to create factory workers? Good little factory workers?
Right. Exactly.
Good little employees.
Yeah. But when you give them the responsibility of their lives, they take it.
Yeah. And they're creative and they're so smart.
Yeah.
And all of the conditioning that we've had over our years on how things have to work or supposed to work, if you get them early enough, they don't have any of that.
That's right.
And, they can come up with the most ingenious things.
They really do. It's fun.
Yeah,
it's great to watch.
World's problems if we just let it.
I'll tell you one other story. There is a gentleman from India, and I was trying to sit here thinking what his name was. I can't remember what his name is. But starting about 10 years ago, something like that, he went into one of the inner cities of one of the poorer cities in India, and he arranged to have a computer installed on the street, on sidewalk level, in a building, in one of the poorest neighborhoods. And he had it set up with controls that kids could operate, but they weren't like mice. I mean, it was more like touchscreen kind of stuff. And it was all weatherproof, so they could be out there 24/7, and left it connected to the internet. And then, and the computer was in English. None of the kids spoke English. None of the community spoke English. And he just left it there. There were no instructions how to use it. He just left it there. And then he came back a year later. And a year later, all of the local kids had A, taught each other English, B, taught each other how to use the computer, and had mastered it entirely.
Wow. Incredible. Holy cow. That's incredible.
And meanwhile, there are teachers all over the world who are in a dead faint saying, yeah, but what about my job? What do you need me for now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's still skills that people need to learn that,
There are.
you know, other people are better at and can mentor
Exactly.
people as they come up. And, you know, I think that's so interesting. I just want to say this, that it's so interesting that one of our first reactions to hearing something so cool as that will often be, and I think you nailed it on the head when you said that, this fear of like, I'm not going to be relevant anymore. And we do this a lot with people in our lives or people that we're watching, you know, you know, somebody I'm teaching or whatever, if they, you know, finally get it and now they're, you know, making waves or, you know, being successful or whatever, a lot of people will feel, you know, this feeling of jealousy or envy or whatever, like this competitiveness, when truly it's the tide rises all the ships. So, you know, once you start them rising, the whole fabric of society gets to rise with it. It's not just one and now you're being left behind. That comes from the scarcity mindset, not an abundance or, you know, a possibilities mindset. So I think we really need to start reframing for society and within ourselves as well when this comes up, of it's not somebody taking away something from you, it's somebody giving you an opportunity to create something that you couldn't even imagine before this point in time.
I love that. That's beautifully stated. Absolutely beautifully stated. In fact, you stimulated one more story, so I'll tell you one more Sudbury story. This is also one of my favorite stories. There are a bunch of them that I love, but I love this one particularly. One of the great fears, you mentioned fears, one of the great fears that parents have about sending a kid to a school like this is they won't learn the stuff that they need to learn in order to function in life. They won't learn to read, they won't learn to write, they won't learn to do math, they won't learn sciences, they won't learn all this stuff. And it turns out that none of it is true. If you just leave kids on their own, all of them, the Sudbury School found this out really clear over their 40 or 50 year period, that if you just leave kids to their own devices and don't interfere, they will all learn to read by age 12. Every single one of them. A lot of them will learn to read in a way that you can't even identify, even if you are an administrator on the premises, you can't see it happening. And in the cases where you can see it happen, it's usually because one student is teaching another student. They're helping each other get there.
Beautiful.
But one of the really fascinating stories, though, this is what I want to tell, is the story about a group of kids who basically disproved the notion that kids in a Sudbury school or in a open school like this will learn how to do math, that they won't do it. It won't happen.
Yep.
Well, this particular case, the kids wanted to form, the school is known for having all these interest groups, all these kinds of activity groups and so forth that get created spontaneously, and sometimes they need funding. And this one particular group got formed and they wanted to have funding, and the school meeting, which runs the whole thing, said, well, you can have it, but you're going to have to figure out how to raise the money. That's the usual answer. And so they had to figure out, well, how are we going to raise this money? And then they began to realize, well, we got to understand math in order to handle some of this stuff. So they went to one of the staff members. They don't call them teachers, they call them staff members. They went to one of the staff members, who's also one of the head founders of the school, and said, we want to learn how to do math. And now you also have to understand what it's like from the perspective of a staff member, because they're so used to the experience that I had where the kids look to you to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times in their experience, it was not only the kids looking to you to solve the problem, but the parents of the kids were egging the kids on to go to the teacher to solve the problem. So the staff member's first reaction was, your parents put you up to this, right? No. And the kids said, no, this is our idea. We really want to do this. So after he was finally convinced that they really wanted to do it, they worked out a schedule. And they said, okay, we're going to have these classes on these days. You have to agree to it. They wrote it as a contract, which is really interesting. And then they sat down and started doing it. And they did it using the teacher's edition of a regular public school math book. And the kids would actually go through and they would learn from the teacher's edition. They go check the answers and they try to figure out how do you get to the answer. They were basically doing the whole thing themselves that way. And then he was there basically to, if they got stuck, help them getting past the stuff they were stuck on. It turned out that they learned the first 6 years, grades 1 through 6 of math, in 10 weeks.
What?
And he went to a local public school where he knew a head of a math department. And he talked to the math department head and he said, have you ever heard of anything like this? And the math department head said, I'm not surprised at all. He said, really? He said, no, I'm not surprised at all. Why? The only reason that it takes 6 years is we've learned we have to spoon it out to them a little bit at a time. They won't absorb it any faster than that. If they really want to, they can learn it all in 10 weeks. That's not an issue. It's just that the kids won't learn that fast, so we have to spoon feed it to them.
Because they don't want to learn it when you're forcing it down their throat, you know?
How about that for an insight, right? Forcing it down the throat is actually counterproductive.
Yep. So true. I think about my own math class. I learned so much more if I had the desire. It's so interesting because I'm a financial advisor broker.
Right, yeah.
By day, part-time, and coaching business with abundance consciousness. The other times in my life, it's very fluid. But it's so interesting because I am really bad at math.
Oh, you really?
Atrocious at basics in math. But the more complex stuff, like working a spreadsheet, figuring out complex math problems and solving these problems, that's easy for me. My brain thinks very, very differently. I don't know. I've never seen anybody do it, but where it's like kind of all over the place picking up pieces and it's like, oh, here's the solution. And then I can back engineer it and show you how I got there. But it works very differently. Like the people that I have trained, my agents that I have trained, they're like, Jodi, you need to slow down. We can't follow you with all of this. But it's hilarious because that is so in-depth and intricate and so complex, all of this stuff. And I understand it very, very well, and I know how to do it. But basic math, you ask me some basic, multiplication questions, and I'm like, huh? No, can't do it. Never had a desire to learn it because it was forced down my throat. You just have to memorize it. I didn't want to memorize those things. I just didn't see the value, I guess. I don't know.
I think most people can identify with that. There's a basic term that we use about people who have trouble with reading and writing. We call them illiterate. The same term can be kind of amended and applied to mathematics. That's innumerate. And I would say that the large chunk of the population are innumerate. And I say that because I'm really good at math. I'm very, very good at math. And I know what it's like to deal with people who aren't. And I could just see it. It's so obvious to me that they were terrorized with math.
Yeah.
That's the only word I can think of to describe it. Terrorism. It is a terroristic approach to teaching mathematics that we use in the public school system. Yes. And then I ask myself, if that's the way it is with math, how many other subjects have we done that with? How many different subjects have we forced down kids' throats and driven them away when, in some cases, they actually would have liked them?
Yeah. I love math. The complexity of mathematical problems. I took, chemistry and like organic and inorganic chemistry in college. Loved that. Loved figuring out, the line things and, molecules here, there, plus, minus. I don't know. I don't remember how to do it now, but I loved learning that kind of stuff. It was just the basic math that I just shut down completely. And I'm like, I'm not learning it. I don't care what, X times X is. I have a calculator.
That's right. Yes. What are calculators for? And computers, for goodness sake.
That's right. So funny.
Oh, this has been great. I wish we could keep going, but believe it or not, we're actually over our hour, even if we take out the part that we lost to, the internet disappearing. So, yeah, we just kind of flew through all this stuff. But this has been great. Thank you very much for helping to resurrect this Q&A thing that we're doing now. And I look forward to including it more and more as the weeks come up. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Amazing. Right. Thanks for having me today. This was fun.
Every week. We want you every week. Not just today. We want you every week.
Yes. Well,
and we want you too. That's right. We want all the listeners too. So we want to thank you very much for being a part of it. And by the way, if you want to be a part of the Q&A, send your question in. Walt@LOAtoday.net. It's probably the easiest way to get it there. And hey, we'll be glad to build a show around it. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.